What is a good way to get started in FPV if I don't know what I'm doing?
FPV is just one of those things that I think it's just inevitable that, especially in the beginning, you're going to end up crashing a lot.
All right, welcome to Your Drone Questions Answered. We have with us Dusty Jolly, one of Drone Launch Academy's own. Dusty is our community manager for Drone Launch Connect. Glad to have you on the show, Dusty. Thanks for being here.
Yep, glad to be here, David. Thanks for having me.
Today we're talking about FPV. The question we're answering is, what is a good way to get started in FPV if I don't know what I'm doing? What you would do if you're just starting out, like how to build one, what to buy, what's like the best, cheapest, like entry-level way to get into FPV. Because I gotta be honest with you, I don't know a ton about FPV. I know like the DJI Avata has come out recently.
Mm-hmm.
The DJI has another FPV drone. Those are like right out of the box options. But as far as if you were just going to build something of your own, like true FPV, hit us with how you would do that. Like, what do you need?
The first thing to do would be to go out and get a remote that would work with the simulator that you can download and use on your computer. And I think that's always the easiest way to kind of get your feet wet to understand what it feels like to fly an FPV drone without actually having to make the initial investment to go ahead and buy one and then realize that you don't like it. Or also, it helps to get out and to learn to fly these things on a simulator before you go out and fly one in real time, because you will end up crashing them. The FPV is just one of those things that I think it's just inevitable that, especially in the beginning, you're going to end up crashing a lot, just some hard landings. But especially when you get a little bit more advanced, you're going to want to try to maybe push yourself a little bit more. You get a little bit more confident, and you're going to end up hitting probably some obstacles that you didn't necessarily plan on. So first thing on the remote control, I would just, you can go the cheapest route and just buy one just to use on the simulator. What I would recommend doing is actually getting one that you're considering using if you are going to go ahead and build or buy an actual FPV drone. So, of course, DJI has a big stake in the FPV world. They were the ones that first brought digital to the FPV world. Before that, it was all analog. So when you were looking through your goggles, you were looking through more of like a security cam feed versus like a true digital experience with what you get now with companies like DJI, Walk Snell, and there's a couple of others that are starting to come out. So that being said, I'd recommend for anyone that's just getting started off and not too confident as far as the soldering goes and they want something that's going to be pretty user friendly, is to start off with the DJI FPV remote.
And you know how much that costs?
Yeah, I think for probably $200 to $250, you should be able to buy one.
Okay.
But this is, if you can see this, the original FPV remote that came out before DJI had released any of their FPV drones. I really like this one a lot. It's one that I would recommend to anybody. And the good thing about that as well is I'm pretty sure, I'm not 100% positive with the Avata and the DJI FPV drone, if this remote binds. They do have that new remote that's out that came out with the FPV drone, and that will work with the simulators and everything as well.
If you're not going to use a DJI controller, what's like another controller that you can use, a non-DJI one?
Sure. So you can use, there's probably hundreds of different controllers that you can use when you get out there. The one thing to keep in mind is a lot of like your receivers that you're going to be putting onto these FPV drones that you're going to be building. Typically, they are already have the capability to bind almost automatically without having to do any extra soldering or wiring to the transmitter to get the two to work to bind. They just bind really easy, and that's one of the other benefits of having the DJI FPV remote. So a lot of people, though, they get into it, want to change up the remote. They just like the different designs, but also you can start adding different receivers that can give you a little bit more range and penetration than what you're going to get out of the box with the DJI setup. So the other remote that I use is, I've got a Tango 2. It's a TBS Tango 2. It's more of like a video game style controller. I really do like this one. I still I still use them both. I have different drones that are wired up to the different or bound to the different transmitters, really just to make sure that I always have one as a backup. Um, but it is a little bit more work as far as when you're building one to put an additional receiver in there. There's some other configurations when you go into more of kind of like the programming side of the drone that you have to do a couple things, but it's not anything too complicated. It's one of those things that you can YouTube and probably find 100 different answers.
Besides controllers, what like how would you go about first building one? Like, what are list off all the
Sure.
components that you would need to buy?
Sure. So DJI has now come out with the FPV drone. I think it was their first entry point into the FPV world to get people a little bit of a taste of it that weren't really, weren't experienced in doing it, but wanted to get in without having to build. The thing is that came out pretty pricey, and I know that from what I've heard that the repairs on those things are extremely expensive as well. So now, enter the Avata, which I know a lot of people that have gotten the Avata as their first FPV drone. I think it's moving better in the direction as far as getting into FPV. They seem to be a little bit more durable and also make it a little bit easier for pilots that are just now getting into it. But that being said, it seems so. The Avata is what you call a Cinewhoop, and it's got ducted propellers, and it's made for typically just more slow cinematic flying, whether you're going to fly indoors or outdoors. But it's just not really anything crazy, but it does give you the FPV experience, in kind of a smooth cinematic way. So this right here is the first one that I built. It's been changed up as it's been crashed multiple times over the years, but the basic components that you need for one, and you'll find when you get out there and look, is the first thing you want to do is decide on a frame.
The frame, just describe it. It's just like the X-shaped
Sure.
underneath part, right? That connects everything.
Yep. It's just basically like the skeleton that holds everything together, is what it is. And typically they come in different configurations. This one right here is called a Drone Squirt. And that's really just the frame design, how everything kind of mounts up and marries together into the drone. So, when you buy that, typically what you're getting is the carbon fiber frame, all the hardware, whether it be the standoff, which are just little things that kind of separate the two frames from each other, and then some of the screws. The one thing to make sure before you go out and you buy a frame is that you know exactly which transmitter you're thinking about using. And then also with the flight controllers, a lot of times, depending on the frame, you might pick a different flight controller. If it's going to be like a tight fit, usually I think those are like 20 by 20 mounting patterns or like a 30 by 30 millimeter. And that's just kind of talking about the distance between the mounting holes there. So
you got first start off with a controller.
Mm-hmm.
That way you can practice simulations, making sure you know how to fly. You're not going to crash as much. Then when you're ready to go fly, you have your controller, then you go buy your frame. Then you have a flight controller that you would include in there, a receiver.
The receiver in this one right here, I'm not sure if you can see. Typically you're going to have, for the people that want to go digital, which I would highly recommend in today's world, just skip the analog thing and go straight to digital. I think it's going to be
Okay.
So you've got companies like Cadex Vista, which makes these transmitters, which are going to be what connects to the camera that displays the image that you're going to be seeing into the goggles. The cool thing is, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky, is they also work as the receivers as far as taking in the signal that you're giving from the inputs on the remote control.
So it's receiving the remote control signal and then transmitting the video back to the
Correct.
goggles.
That's exactly it.
Yep.
So that is one of the benefits when we go back to the DJI remote. Whenever you get this, you get your transmitter put in there, or your, they're called the Cadex Vista or the Air Unit, but whatever's going to be your digital camera system, and they will automatically bind up to the DJI remote.
Okay.
So moving one step forward, if you want to use a different remote, you have to get a different separate receiver. I think it's typically like 4 or 5 different soldering joints that you have to do additionally, but it does give you the the capability to use a different remote for whatever reason you might want to.
At what point are you slapping motors on this thing and propellers and connecting those?
So the first thing that you're going to want to do is actually put the motors on first, typically.
Okay.
So Motors will vary in size as far as width or diameter and in height. And so the various, and when you go and look at a frame, it will tell you what motor sizes. A lot of times there's a range in there of what it would recommend. So you want to make sure that your motors are going to fit the frame that you're getting. So go in, you get your frame set up, get your pieces laid out. And then the first thing that you want to do is go ahead and just get your motors connected to the frame and go ahead and screw those in. Then at that point, you've got 3 wires coming off of every motor towards the center of the frame that are going to be ultimately wired to the electronic speed controller is what they're going to be wired to
Okay.
first.
Is electronic speed controller, is that different than the flight controller?
Well,
Or is that
so
the same thing?
yes and no. A lot of guys, in the way that it was traditionally done in the past, is they used electronic speed controllers for each individual motor, and they were something that they would put on
Okay.
the arms of the frame and then wire that in between the flight controller.
Okay.
Now, what a lot of people have moved to, and I'm not really sure if I'm sure I've got one laying around, but it's using what's called a stack. So it's basically, it looks like 2 chips. I'm trying to think if I've got one that you could. So this, I'm not sure if you can see, but there's 2 pieces in here. The one that the wires are soldered to right here, that is my speed controller. There's another
Okay.
piece that is on top of that, and they call it a stack is because they literally stack on top of each other. You can stack, sometimes you can stack different brands, but a lot of times I just buy them together as a stack.
And so that stacks the flight controller and the electronic
The speed controller.
um, speed controller at the same time.
Sure. And so what they do is
Sure.
yeah, the flight controller is going to plug into your video transmitter. It's going to be, so when it's sending or receiving the input from the remote, it is telling the flight
hmm
controller how to control how to control the speed controllers as far as how quick, which motors need to be spinning, which
Which motors to
direction.
fire up?
Yep.
Yep.
And so basically the flight controller is going to be the brains of the FPV drone. The speed controllers is what's going to be outputting the power that is being told to from the flight controller.
I'm assuming you got batteries in there, right?
Yeah, and that's where it gets to be really fun.
What kind of batteries you use?
So this drone that I was showing you earlier, this is a 4-cell drone. I didn't want to jump when I was first getting into it. I didn't want to get too crazy and jump into the 6-cell world, but I would advise anybody that's getting into it, just go ahead and just go straight for the 6S. This is a 6S battery.
Is that just size differences?
Well, it's the amount of cells that actually are in the battery. So I do have a small 4S battery here. So that you can see this is a 1.3, so a 1300 milliamp per hour battery. And this is I think 1100. So, but you can see there is a pretty significant size in the weight. But typically you're going to get a
Well,
lot more power output on a 6S battery. It really is kind of a science when you get down to it as far as figuring out the components that you want to use. Then it gets into, the size of the motors that you want to use. And then a lot of people, I don't take it this far. A lot of times I just go off of what I see being recommended or have talked to other pilots that have given me suggestions on things, but they really get into the weight of the battery, the type of the prop that you use versus the kind of motor that you use. It's all about kind of the thrust to weight ratio. And that's what is ultimately going to give you the longest flying time for each drone.
okay. And then what about the camera? What camera are you typically throwing on these guys?
This one right here, this is the original DJI FPV cam. So this is connected and it comes in a kit with my DJI air unit transmitter here. So this is all just the camera plugs in to the air unit of the transmitter, and a lot of times those are just plug and play. But I'll also use the Cadix, which gives you, so you can swap out the cameras on these depending on what kind of resolution you're looking for, how much money you want to spend. On this one right here, I have what's called the I think it's the Cadix Vista Polar antenna lens, and this actually I think has a fixed aperture of, it's pretty low. I want to say it's like 2.8 or something. So it's really good for flying at night or indoors. It really
Mm.
does. It's kind of amazing. I've been flying before outside and not realize that it was actually almost pitch black, but I could still see just perfectly through that thing. So
Does that look like a GoPro? Is that not a GoPro attached to that thing?
Yeah, I do. I actually have, that's the other thing that you're going to need if you want to start making really cinematic videos is this is the Hero 10 Bones. So this is actually the stripped down version. This one does not have a battery, so you actually have to power it
The
from the
drone
drone.
battery.
Yeah, from the drone itself or from the drone battery. But it saves you a lot as
Gotcha.
far as the weight goes.
Out of all the drones that you currently own right there that you've built, which one would be the easiest for someone who's new to build?
What I've learned is the smaller the drone, a lot of times smaller the wiring, solder joints, and everything. So the smaller drone is typically harder to build.
Okay.
I would highly recommend for a first build building the 3-inch Cinewhoop.
Is that not what you have there, or is that something
Yes,
different?
yeah, that's this one, and I've got this rainbow one in the back. They're the 3-inch
All
Cinewhoop.
right. All right. So you got the frame. You talked about that. How much
Mhm.
is that going to set someone
I
back?
think the frame with the hardware, and that doesn't include. So the other thing that you're going to want to get is the 3D printed ducts and various accessories that go along with it. So typically,
Okay.
to get a frame with all the 3D printed components, the screws, everything that you need, you're going to spend anywhere probably $50 to $90 somewhere in there.
And then you got the motors. How much are the motors going to be?
The motors on these are actually fairly cheap for the 3-inch. I want to say that these were maybe $11 or $12 a piece.
Oh, okay. That's not bad. And then you buy the props separately, I'm assuming?
Props are always the good thing. Props, you can buy a bunch of those because they're anywhere between $1 to $3 or $4 for a pack of 4, depending on
Oh,
the brand
okay.
and stuff. Yeah,
So
so
cheap again.
yeah, I stock up on these.
The electronic speed controllers, how much are those on that thing? Or do you
So
have the combo ones on those?
So I've got the combo on these. This is the stack, but so you can actually on these smaller drones, you can use what's called an AIO or an all-in-one. And so that's where I've got one right here that's actually burn up. This is a flight controller and speed controller all in one board. So a lot
Okay.
of times on your smaller drones, you'll see people using these. The downside to using these is if you do burn up like one speed controller, um, you basically
The whole
fried
thing's
the whole
toast.
thing. Yeah, and these right here are
Mm.
probably $80 or $90.
So the benefit would be just if to have them separate, you can replace them separately.
Yeah, yeah,
So you have a stack system on that.
I do.
How much is that with the speed controllers and the flight controller?
Probably between $60 to $120. They're making
Okay.
some now that have a lot of cool Bluetooth features that I don't see myself using, but um, I've seen that they're getting pretty pricey depending on just kind of what
Okay.
you want to do with it.
How much is like the camera on that thing? What was it? Is that one had like a DJI camera on it?
Yeah, so if you're getting the DJI, I've actually moved away from those and going more towards the Cadix stuff, which they're in some sort of a relationship with DJI. They work together on a lot of these things. So for the air unit and the camera, you're going to spend realistically about $130 to $160.
What about your GoPro Hero 10? Those are pretty
Yeah, so
expensive,
I've
right?
got a couple of those. So yeah, they're if you're buying them new, they're $350 to $400.
Okay. So they can if you want to go GoPro style, those are a lot more expensive. Okay.
Yeah,
And then controller you said was what, like $200, 250
yeah,
bucks?
200 is probably a good range on controller.
That transmitter receiver, was that built in with that air unit camera thing or was that a separate piece?
So if you do want to go out and you want to get a different remote, you don't want to use the DJI and you have to buy separate receiver and antennas, that's going to add an additional cost, probably $30 for each drone that you build.
Oh, and the battery. How much does the battery cost?
Yeah, so the batteries,
Let's go with the 6 cell
so
one.
the 6L, these are going to run you anywhere from probably for a decent one that's going to last you, I want to say anywhere from 18 to $25 a piece, something like that.
And how much flight time you get out of those?
If you're just cruising and the drone's kind of tuned the way that it needs to be tuned, everything's running good. It's a good day if you're getting 7 minutes out of one.
Oh, 7 minutes. So these
Yeah,
things go quick.
yeah, they go really fast.
Okay.
Typically, you're going to
Gotcha.
average between 4 to 6 minutes on these.
So that green, the Cinewhoop 3-inch one.
If you're going to build this one right now, I think you could realistically do it probably between $350 and $400.
And then what's the most expensive build you have out of your ones back there?
This is my favorite one right here, but my most expensive one is actually probably this one, and this is the one that I fly. It was the first, so this is a 5-inch frame. This is more of what they call a freestyle quad. This is the ones that can go really fast and they're very nimble in the air. But and back to your question too, I think that these are easier to build. They're just because the soldering joints, the pads are a lot bigger, a lot more room to work with. Uh, and I would think that it'd be good to maybe start with one of these. The things that these are a lot more powerful, a lot faster. The props are exposed, so you're going to typically crash these a lot more, and they don't, they hold up fairly well. But I've got a little bit more expensive of a stack in this one. I do have the DJI Air unit and camera on this one. So this one, and I'm running the Crossfire receiver, which works with this other remote that gives me a little bit more range. But probably on this one, this is probably closer to $420 something altogether.
So any of them are like $300 to $500 if you're going to build one.
Yep.
And is that with the controller or no?
No, that's separate of the controller.
Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Yes. If you do want to get into FPV, you're going to need a set of goggles as well. And that's the other component.
Oh yeah, goggles. Duh. Yeah.
So this is the original version 1 DJI goggles. I think you can buy these new now for probably around $400, $429. I think was the last price I saw on them. They've got a new version out. I don't even know if you can buy the V1s. The V2s I think are $429 now. But they do. Okay. They just released with the Avata. They came out with a new goggle. I'm not really sure of all the benefits. I know that it does have an OLED screen. It's supposed to be a lot smaller form factor wise and weight than these, but they're probably going to be $500 to $600 for a digital goggle. That's about what you're going to spend.
So $300 to $500 for the drone, $200-ish for the controller. Let's say $500 give or take for the goggles.
Sure. And then you're going to want to cut a few batteries.
Not super expensive to maintain and replace stuff, but a little bit pricey to get in. Maybe $1,500 to kind of get in at the beginning.
And you can get it. I think you can get in under $1,500, realistically.
So any of you out there who are thinking about FPV drones, getting into it, refer back to this episode. We'll try to, if you're watching on YouTube, we'll try to post a bunch of links and summary below this video, or you can go to yourdronequestionsanswered.com. Maybe find this episode there, or jump around on dronelaunchacademy.com. It's maybe there as well with a post and a write-up with all this helpful info. So thank you, Dusty, for coming on this episode, laying down some quick FPV knowledge for us.
Thanks.
And we'll see you on the next one.